All right, hey, what's going on, y'all? So we had an amazing meeting this weekend with our first meeting in the flexible animal-based omnivore progression. This was our kickoff meeting for a 4-week progression, and we had a really good showing. We had some people show up live. We had a good crowd on Crowdcast. And so what I wanted to do is just give you the cliff notes, the summary of the key points, and also the goals that we have going forward. Now, the rest of this information, the full video, which by the way was just a mind-blowing talk, we had a lot of great discussion. All the PDFs, handouts, and resources are in our community website at community.superhumantransformation.com. Just click on courses and then navigate to flexible animal-based omnivore. Now, just to summarize what we went through, first of all, as real foodies, as people that are committed to eating real food, one of the things that we need to do to master real food for life is always be experimenting, always be going without something. And so the experiment this month is to eliminate plants, to move towards an animal-based way of eating. And so we provide an argument for that. We're not saying that we 100% agree with it, but we're making this argument to justify doing this progression. And we also recommend doing a progression so that we ease ourselves into eliminating plants to minimize the symptoms that we experience and the transitional difficulties that we experience. All right. So the first thing that we talked about was how, as human beings in our evolution, we had this dramatic increase in brain size. And the dramatic increase in brain size started about 2.5 million years ago and really started to take off about 2 million years ago, and then took off a little bit more about 1 million years ago. And so what we know from the archaeological record and from anthropology, and most archaeologists and anthropologists would agree with this, is that it coincided with our consuming animal food. So about 2.5 million years ago, there's evidence of us being scavengers. And then at about 2 million years ago, there's evidence of us actually creating tools and hunting weapons and things that facilitated us hunting animals, transitioning from scavengers to hunters, and also eating entire animals nose to tail. We also see evidence in this through what we call delta 15 nitrogen isotopes. And through these isotopes, we can estimate where an animal falls on this whole, like an herbivore creator of nutrients from plant matter all the way up to a top level carnivore. And we'll see in herbivores, there's a delta 15 nitrogen isotope of about 3 to 7%, with carnivores 6 to 12%. And what we found is that Neanderthals and then Homo sapiens up to about 50,000 years ago had the highest levels, around 12 to 13.5%, which implies that we had transitioned to top level carnivores. And this kind of makes sense because when you think about it, if we have this capacity to go from consuming nutrient deplete plant matter like grasses and herbs, which to take advantage of those foods, we have to be able to ferment them in a large intestine or in a large fermentation system. And then through that fermentation process, we can convert that plant matter into usable short chain fatty acids and other nutrients that can then contribute to structure in the body and energy. And so if we developed a way to bypass that and just eat animals directly, now I'm giving this animal the nutrients that this animal needs. I'm eating the flesh and the muscle and the bones and the cartilage and the ligaments and the organs that contribute to everything that's inside of me. All right, so this is exactly what happened over time. We had a dramatic increase in brain size. Our digestive system went from a fermentation digestive system to an assimilation digestive system. We went from having a large intestine to a large small intestine, which means that we went towards or moved towards assimilating more nutrients or absorbing more nutrients, right? So we are now geared for direct nutrient to nutrient assimilation and direct energy assimilation, meaning that if I need a specific nutrient, think about it, if you go to your doctor and you get some blood work and you're low in a nutrient, say for instance magnesium or iron, what's the first thing they tell you to do? Consume magnesium or iron, right? So we are geared for direct nutrient to nutrient assimilation. This is how our digestive systems evolved. We are also geared for direct energy assimilation, which means that I either need to be eating fat to use fat for energy, or I need to be eating carbohydrates to use carbs for energy, or ideally, when I'm not eating, my body's tapping into my body fat stores for fat for energy. But then also, we talked about how the contribution of controlling fire moved us even more in this direction of an increasing brain size and smaller digestive system that was geared for nutrient assimilation, simply because cooking pre-digests foods. So as we learn to control fire, we learn to control the cooking of food and make foods more digestible and calories more accessible. All right, so when you compare our digestive system to other primates, this is exactly what we see. We see that we have a very large small intestine, which means that we have a very large capacity to assimilate nutrients, and we have a very small colon or large intestine compared to other primates, because we don't ferment plant matter. We don't ferment things the way that a gorilla or a cow does. All right, so now, up until about 50,000 years ago, it looks like we were top-level carnivores. It looks like, from the fossil record, from all the evidence that we can find, that we were consuming a massive amount of meat and fat and organs and things like that. And about 50,000 years ago, we see that we had a decrease in stature and a decrease in brain size. And this coincided with the advent of the Neolithic Revolution, or the advent of agriculture, where we started to domesticate plant species and consume them on a regular basis. So the theory here is, again, we evolved a digestive system. We got larger brains from being top-level carnivores, or moving towards top-level carnivores. We still keep this flexible, adaptive digestive system, which means we still can consume some plants. We just don't get the same benefit out of plants as maybe a herbivore does. But then something happened around 40,000 years ago, which contributed to a decrease in our stature and brain size, and this coincides with our adoption of agriculture. So our ancestors, all the way up to about 40,000 years ago, always sought out nutrients, bioavailable nutrients, and bioavailable energy. And so then we finally talked about nutritional vitality. Remember, we had this talk on nutritional vitality and how we can assess foods based on their nutrient density and the bioavailability of nutrients and their minimal toxicity, and whether they contribute to metabolic efficiency. And when you look at plants, take something for instance like broccoli, right? When you look at something like a stalk of broccoli, I'm not saying broccoli does not have any beneficial value, but it does not have, especially compared to an animal food, does not have very bioavailable nutrients. It has some water-soluble vitamins, it has some minerals, but a lot of those minerals and nutrients are bound up in the fiber, which is very difficult to access unless you cook it maybe. But then also there's anti-nutrients in most plants that will keep us from absorbing what we think is beneficial nutrients in the plant in the first place. Right? And then plants come with their own toxins, and they have to, because they have to protect themselves from predators and bugs and insects. So they secrete what is known as phytolexins, which are like plant pesticides, and there's a million different versions and varieties of these things. Phytic acid binds to minerals and holds on to it. Oxalates go through a lot of people. I have a oxalate sensitivity. And then anti-nutrients like prolamines and phytates and lectins and all these different things are designed to discourage animals from eating plants, or to not get as much benefit out of eating plants. But some animals have adopted a digestive system that actually helps them mitigate those things through fermentation. Now, if I look at this compared to a piece of steak, there is no problem whatsoever with a piece of steak. There is no natural toxins in a piece of steak. Someone might say, well, what about hormones and antibiotics from these mass feeding operations? Well, that might be true, but the same is true with plants. Plants, are sprayed with pesticides and herbicides and irradiated, so we have the same quality argument with plants and animals. But from from a natural standpoint, or a holistic standpoint, or pristine standpoint, there is no problem with meat whatsoever. Everything in meat is something that my body can use, because my body does well on direct nutrient to nutrient assimilation, which means that everything in that meat, or most of what's in that meat, goes to the purposes in my body that are meat-based. So then we finally touched on the progression of what's optimal to consume versus suboptimal to consume. And what we find is that animal-based foods and animal-based nutrients are much more bioavailable, much more nutrient dense, much more calorically dense than the plant-based versions of those things. And so then we discussed our problematic plant progression, which is this spectrum of plants. So again, we want to ease ourselves into this through a progression. And so this progression is going to slowly take out the things that are most problematic and then end with the things that are least problematic. And so on the most problematic end of the spectrum, we have seeds and nightshades, because these tend to have the most toxins in them. And at the least problematic end of the spectrum, we have things like non-sweet fruits. And we say non-sweet because the sweet ones have a lot of sugar and fructose, which can be problematic for humans. And then we have our safe starches, again, energy-based. And then we have things like squashes and some other things that have a little bit more starch in them. In the middle kind of gray area, we have things like really fibrous, hearty vegetables like broccoli and cauliflower and asparagus. And if you're going to consume those things, you'd want to cook them because that makes them easier to digest. And then we also have sweet fruits. Now for this progression, the first step that we recommended for all our people was, first of all, make your priority eating animal foods. So when you eat your meals, make the first thing that you eat your animal foods. Eat animal foods until satiation. Eat your meats and fats until satiation, and then you can finish with approved plants. All right, for the plant matter realm, we say no, for this first week in the progression, this first stage, we say no hearty vegetables. All right, hearty vegetables, again, are the really tough fibrous ones. No nightshades, which includes tomatoes, potatoes, peppers, eggplants, cayenne, paprika. We also have a resource that lists out a lot of the different variations of that, because that also can apply to different spices and seasonings. And then also no nuts or seeds. Now we already, as an SHT community, don't do anything with grains anyway, but we do allow hard-shelled nuts and properly prepared legumes. So we're saying no nuts or seeds, no hard-shelled nuts or properly prepared legumes. All right, and then, but you can consume in the plant world for this first part of the progression, high-fat produce such as avocados, olives, and coconuts are great. Soft greens that don't require cooking, like mixed greens and spinach and things like that, arugula, but they can be cooked if you want to. And then our carbohydrates, like our safe starches and ancestral tubers and squashes and fruit, and then spices and seasonings and herbs and stuff are great as long as they don't contain nightshades. And if you're looking for some recommendations on picking something local and seasonal, a really good resource is seasonalfoodguide.org, where you can pull up all the produce that's seasonal in your location based on the time of year. Also, we talked about a superfoods focus, and the superfoods focus, if you were able to throw this in the mix without making things too complicated for yourself, would be a half a quart of bone stock per day to start to give us some of these nutrients that we're not getting from just eating animal meats, 2 scoops of collagen per day, and then up to a tablespoon of raw unfiltered honey, which we do consider a superfood, and it is 100% animal based. And then we had some frequently asked questions about what kind of liquids we could consume, and we said definitely clean water, mineralized water, sparkling water is awesome. We can still do coffees and teas, LaCroix and Zevias, and have an alcoholic drink per evening. So again, this is a progression, right? So we're easing ourselves into more difficulty. And next week we'll talk about something else, all right? So all of this information is consolidated into a bunch of different PDFs and resources, which again, all you have to do is log into your community website at community.superhumantransformation.com, go over to the courses, and then you'll find all the different videos and PDFs and things, but this is just a recap and summary. And I think that's everything that I need to say. I just want to emphasize that what we're doing here is making the argument for animal-based foods being the priority. We're not saying that we 100% believe in this necessarily, because we will always advocate a balanced way of eating, but to rationalize or justify us going through this experiment, we want to understand this argument in this end of the spectrum, and that's what we're doing with this progression, okay? All right, cool. So I think that covers everything. I hope that was a Cliff Notes and wasn't too long. If you have any questions or anything, please just let us know, and we will talk to you guys soon.